Well, welcome to Family Month at First Baptist Church of North Augusta. I'm recording this in October of 2022, and if you're watching this, it's because you're interested in the future of our church family. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we have been in a 4 or 5 part journey of just kind of itemizing and kind of visualizing some of the things that God's put on my heart as the pastor of this church for the next 10 years of our church family, beginning in 2023 and ending in 2033. And all of this comes around 5 different words, and I'm going to put them on the screen for you. Family and legacy are 2 of the big ones, but you can see down in the middle of this slide, value, invest, legacy, family, and vision. Those are the 5 words that are creating the sentence, we value family by investing in a vision of legacy. We value family by investing in a vision of legacy. And so we're taking a look at each one of these 5 words together over this month and preparing our hearts and minds, maybe healing the soul a little bit, moving it around so we can begin to plant some things in our church family over the next 10 years that we believe will really create a great harvest in the future. So as we go through this, I want to remind you of a few things. Our task in this video is to build off the previous 2 videos where we introduced all this and then tackled the first piece of this, which is the word legacy. We're starting at the end of that sentence and working backwards. And today we'll talk a little bit about vision. Okay, so go through this with me. And at any time you have any questions, just know that you can send me an email directly at askanything@csrachurch.org, and that'll be your place to get your questions answered. Now, all of this falls into the context of disciples making disciples. I've said this many times, and it's worth repeating. We don't have a mission statement for our church. Our church exists for the mission statement that Christ established in Matthew 28, to go and make disciples. And so this is very much about replication. It's not about growing attendance. It's about replicating the discipleship patterns that the early church had. The way we do this at our church is through these 3 core values that I always love putting in front of you because these are the passions of my heart. Building families, the upward, the inward being teaching the Bible, and then the outward being loving our neighbors. And as we do this, it's important in this moment of our church and in each one of our families to sit back and say, all right, what does the next 10 years hold for our family of origin and our family of God here at the church? So the question that's been on my mind is, for all of us, how old will we be in 2033? What will that look like? What will you look like? What will you be doing? What will you not be doing? And how old will your family be in 2033? Not just your family of origin, but your extended family, the people that are close to you, and specifically the family of God that's around you, the people that you're doing church family life with. What seasons of life and in situations will they be in? Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, talked about these different seasons in Ecclesiastes 3. He said there's a season for everything, and there's a time for every matter under the sun. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what's planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, even a time to mourn, contrasted with a time to dance, a time to cast away things and a time to gather them together, a time to embrace someone, and at the same time, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek things out and a time to give things away and lose things, a time to keep and a time to cast away. There's even a time to tear things and a time to sew them back together, a time to keep silent and a time to speak up, a time for love and a time for hate. And Solomon even said there's a time for war and a time for peace. As we look at this family month and we begin to think about these words and the 10 years that are ahead of us in our families of origin and our church family, we need to think about the seasons of life that we're going to be in. And remember that we value, over the next 10 years, we're putting a high value on family by investing in this vision of legacy. One of our elders at our church, when I presented this over the last couple of weeks, he pointed out that legacy is really vision that's actually fulfilled. That's what a legacy is, something that's a vision that's fulfilled. But vision is future legacy. Both of them, he said, were connected by the pursuit and obedience to God's will. So when we think about these 2 first words we're looking at, legacy and vision, we got to keep in mind that all of this wraps around God's wisdom and His will and His desires and His plan for our life. Now, over the last several years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the future of the church, and just recently, I shared this with our 5 p.m. service, but you're not going to be able to see everything on this, but I want you to just kind of get your eyes on this Post-it note. Up at the top is 2023, and down here at the bottom is 2033. And you can see that there's just a hodgepodge of things. There's a much cleaner version of this, but this is how it started, where we just went year by year and began to put the things that we're talking about here in these videos on some type of tentative timeline. Now, the hard thing about this is a lot of this will play out in an environment that is dynamic. In other words, we plan our activities, and we have a general idea, but we always have to submit it to God and understand that He orders our steps. Some of the things that we began to think of as being maybe 4 or 5 years down the road have already begun to take place in our midst. Some of the things that we may think are right at the beginning of this journey in 2023 may actually take a little bit more time. So the reason I show you that is because I love the visual aspects of just casting vision. If we're going to talk about a legacy, we have to first have a vision. And the most valuable thing that I can do as the pastor of the church, and probably the thing that only I can do as the pastor of the church, is to see the vision. I get the opportunity to walk off into the future spiritually in prayer and sit down in the future in my mind, in my heart, look at what's around as I walk out in my mind 10 years down the road from where we are today. As a person of vision, God's given me vision to walk out that far and just go out and sit down and see what's out there, and then come back and then share some of these things. So, we have to be careful. Don't kill the messenger, and just realize that these are just things that God is showing me. All of this has to be played out in the context of our church family, and He's going to clear the path and bring clarity to this as we move through it, but He's already begun to show me some things. Now, there are 3 immediate predecessors to me in the senior pastor role. Gary Redding, Doug Page, and Ryan Pack were all immediate predecessors to me as senior pastors of this church. And those guys all together account for better part of 2 decades, a little more than that actually, of pastoring. And I want you to know that I've had an opportunity to talk to all 3 of those gentlemen and ask them questions about vision. Very early on when I became the pastor of this church in 2017, late 2017, early 2018, I began to reach out to these gentlemen. In fact, I had conversations with them before I even took the job when I was the interim pastor here, and just asked them, what did you see? What were you feeling? What can you tell me about what God's doing in this church? And all of them had very positive things to say. And it's interesting that each one of them had their own vision and legacy that they were installing and seeing revealed. Now, Doug was only here for about a year. Ryan was here for about 3 years. And as many of you know, Dr. Redding was here for over a decade, almost 2 decades, if I'm remembering correctly. So each one of them had different postures on it from that standpoint as well. I've been here 6 years. So I think the longer that God puts you in a place, the more clarity you have on where you're coming from and where you're going. And when I talked with Gary Redding about some of the things with our church, it was clear to see, even from my standpoint, that a lot of the legacy of the season when he was here was just the amazing facilities that we have, that we're about to have paid off, by the way. It's just a beautiful vision for building facilities and creating a space for families to come and be a part of what's going on here, and I so appreciate that. When I talked with Doug, who was here for right at a year as the pastor, he had a lot of vision and a lot of comments about some of the things that were going on with the staff and the structuring of the church and those types of things. When I talked with Ryan, Ryan's vision was very much about merging faith and life. Some of you were here. I was here when he was in his 3rd year, and what it looked like to bring your faith life and your daily life all into alignment under God's will and God's purpose. And a lot of what he had terminated and began to be reinstalled after he moved on, resigned, and moved to another church. So after 3 years, a little bit of that was planted here as well. And we picked up from every one of those. And as we sit here today, there is a vision that I see for this church. And it's to be quite honest, God showed me some things that are even beyond my tenure here as He's walked me out really far into the future. Pastor friend of mine who pastored a church for nearly 40 years said that everyone is an interim pastor, even if they're there for 40 years. He's already beginning to think about his succession plan and how to have a healthy church after his time has come to an end. So just know that all this isn't just wrapped up around me or my personality, but it is my responsibility to see that vision and then come back and share the vision with you. That's my most important role. See the vision, share the vision. And, they killed some of the Old Testament prophets, the Old Testament, even the good ones, because they just gave them too much too soon. So just know, if we go through some things and you hear some things that don't align with what you think the church could be or should be in the future, hey, listen, if I'm wrong, I want to know. But I challenge you as well, if you're wrong, do you want to know? And many times we just don't get the luxury or take the time to think about what God has for us in the future because we're not willing to just be still and know. We're not willing to just pause and allow God to speak into what's going. And the truth is, if nothing changes, nothing changes. We've got to see the vision, we've got to share the vision, but also the most valuable thing I can do, and perhaps you as well, is to show the vision. What that means is we live it out. We embody it. John 1, it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This incarnational leadership is something that we all have to do. We can't just say, I loved your vision, Pastor. I think it's going to be great, and I can't wait to see it. I think you need to also show it and get in the game and let these values and these things become a part of how you talk about our church and how you engage as a volunteer and as a leader in our church. And then the other thing that's very important is just to say no to the other visions. This is a tough one because as a mentor of mine, Michael Hyatt says, you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want all at the same time. So we have to, once we have clarity on the vision, we have to be willing to say no to things that aren't God's best for us. They may not even be bad things, but they're not God's best. We have to be willing to say no to the wrong things in order to say yes to the right things. We have to say no to the things that might even be good things, but they're not the best things in order so that we have enough space to actually engage with the best things that God has for us. Paul talks about this in Philippians 2 when he says that he prays that they would be able to approve what is excellent. Excellent. And when you hear the word excellence, if you're like me, think of something that's a little bit above just getting by. A lot of churches in America right now are just getting by or worse. What I see for our church is excellence in the future. But we have to be in a posture of prayer, and we have to have a clear vision, and we have to say yes to the vision, absolutely, but we also have to say no to the other things that may not be necessarily bad, evil, immoral. They may even be things that have worked well in the past, but they don't transfer into the future. So let me share a few more things about the vision, very specific things, with the time we have together. First, I see in our future over the next 10 years creating an environment of discipleship where every believer is able to not only spiritually feed themselves, but someone else. This is the idea of replication. Too many times people show up on Sunday and expect me to give them all the spiritual nutrition that they need for an entire week within 30 or 40 minutes. And it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We need to be spending daily time with God and learning and developing the spiritual disciplines and the tools to do our own Bible study, to not be dependent on someone else to feed ourselves and our family. And then we also, in that growth pattern, need to become strong enough to be able to begin to spiritually feed someone else. So as you look at this statement, every believer in the next 10 years, we want to hold a high standard that every person that's underneath the roof of our church as a part of our church family will be able to spiritually feed not only themselves, but be responsible for someone else. Now, a whole different direction. Let me give you a second thought that I have about the vision of our church. I see us prayerfully setting a date to be out of debt as an act of trust, sacrifice, and worship. Now, let me just celebrate the fact that we're seeing this happening right before our eyes right now. We're on target to be out of debt for the first time since the late 1980s within the several months ahead of me where I'm sitting right here in October 2022 as I'm recording this. It could happen before the end of the year. It could happen early next year. In fact, we're not even budgeting in 2023 for any debt reduction past like March or April of next year. So we're within striking distance of this thing, and that excites me. Having been here for 6 years and watched our church family show up again and again and again to the challenge of removing this debt has been really encouraging, and to be able to get to the finish line of that is exciting. But when you think about prayerfully setting a date to be out of debt as an act of trust and sacrifice and worship, that doesn't just apply to this one time. Because I'm not one of these people that's opposed to having debt. Like I've said this on Sunday nights. Like I have a mortgage. Like I have some debt. I mean, we've had student loans in the past. Like debt is not really the devil's work all the time. I just think that if you're going to borrow money, you need to make sure that you have prayerfully engaged in that and set a date prayerfully to be out of debt as an act of trust in God and sacrificing for whatever it is that we're investing in as a church family and worshiping God, and set that date ahead of time and trust Him to provide those resources. Now, not to say that we haven't done this in the past, because we have. Our church has been faithful to manage things, but I will say that we have been very quick to move forward with some things in the past, and it's been very slow to pay some of those things off. And I'm glad we were able to get them paid off, but we need to make sure that we work within the means that God is putting in our church family, and trust Him for those resources to show up. And that's an important piece of how we navigate the financial stability of our church and prepare ourselves for any potential attacks on churches in the future. You know, I said recently that the way our culture is going is it's not just post-Christian anymore. We're not a post-Christian America. We're actually a anti-Christian America. And if things continue to go in the direction that they are, it's very possible that churches and 501c3s and religious organizations could be in a position where the government begins to bring down some high levels of expectations that are debilitating. For example, if we just had to pay property taxes on the facility that I'm standing in now as I'm recording this, and our church and all these different buildings that we have, it would be debilitating to our budgeting process. So we have to become aware that the environment that we're coming from is not the environment that we're heading into. And we can pray that everything changes and it becomes more like it was back when Ronald Reagan was the president, but I think we're a long way from Ronald Reagan at this point. And in my lifetime, we're seeing the culture continually shifting in a direction. So financially, prayerfully, and when it comes to borrowing money and acquiring things and building things, we need to be very wise in how we do that. The other thing we need to do is we need to prepare ourselves to begin to spread out a bit. So as we do that with acquiring campuses and doing different things, we need to pivot to a name that can travel. That's very important to the future of our church. First Baptist Church of North Augusta, that name is one that works really, really well here on Georgia Avenue in the building and the campus that I'm on right now. But it only works here, and it only works in North Augusta. A great example of a church that pivoted to a name that can travel is First Baptist Church of Simpsonville, South Carolina. I think they have 5 or 6 campuses, maybe 7 now at this point. They're running 2,000 or 3,000. But that number is a combination of multiple campuses that are spread out over the community where they are planted. And some of those campuses are not in Simpsonville. And First Baptist is not really a name that travels into the communities where they are either very well. So what they have done is they have begun to use the title Upstate Church. They've pivoted to a name that can travel. And Upstate Church, although it's not the formal name of First Baptist Church Simpsonville, that's still the name of the church, they do business as a different church name. So when they have a different site, it doesn't say First Baptist Church of Simpsonville in this other town. It's Upstate Church, Upstate Church. There are many examples of this. And for us, we're prayerfully considering beginning to have a DBA, is what it's called in other states, a doing business as policy of doing business as family church. In South Carolina, where our church is, many of you are probably not aware of this, I wasn't, but we don't really have a DBA process, I'm told by our legal consultants. We have what's called a trademark, is what it's called in South Carolina. And currently, no one has a trademark on family church. Now, with our core values being leading with building families and all the families that we serve at our weekday program and all the things that are going on with families and building families underneath our roof, it makes sense for us to consider this as a potential option, as a name to pivot to and begin to do business as we begin to see God do more. And this is already in the works. We're beginning to explore some of this. something that we would move into as a congregation and would require a lot of thought and prayer. But we need to move in a direction where we're in a posture that allows us to have a name that pivots. Another thing about this is it could give us a great opportunity to develop our own 501c3 status that's actually independent from the South Carolina Baptist. Now, this is normal, by the way, for most churches our age. When they began their processes of establishing themselves as a church, they leaned on the South Carolina Baptist in organizational structures to create this 501c3. But it's normal, but I'd say it's probably not ideal. We really need to work as best we can, and the folks in Columbia are telling us this. We need to be as autonomous as we possibly can be, to be flexible and adaptable. I believe over the next 10 years, flexibility and adaptability will be superpowers. They will be superpowers for anyone that holds them in any organization that can activate them. So as we do continue in the future, we need to set ourselves up not only with a name that can pivot, but as an autonomous, self-governing entity. And as we do, we'll be positioned to do some things that you're going to see now. I believe in the next 10 years, we will add 2 additional campuses, one in Aiken County and one in Columbia County. Why? Well, we're already spread out that far as a church family. I was just having lunch just this week with the pastor of First Presbyterian of Augusta, and he and I were talking about how spread out our congregations are, and just all the way out into the far reaches of the other side of Augusta, all the way down into Aiken, people driving in to this centralized area where our church sits, and First Presbyterian's the same situation. And so I saw recently, I think it's close to 40% of our main contributors to our church. I don't know who they are, but I just see where they live. About 40% of them don't live in North Augusta. So our church, although it is primarily North Augustans that are here, there's a lot of people that see great value in North Augusta and see great value in First Baptist North Augusta to drive in. So we're unique in this community in that we have some theological distinctions. We have some doctrinal distinctions that are unique. We're big on grace, but we're also big on the truth. And we're really a replicating church that's making disciples. And I think that the uniqueness of what we do is something that can benefit a lot of communities. Not only are we going to see 2 campuses launch, at least, in different directions, we're also going to see dying churches all around us. And I believe that we will adopt 3 dying churches in our area over the next 10 years, maybe more. I'm hearing that there's a lot of need, as many as 16 to 18 churches just here in Aiken alone, not to mention anything on the other side of the river from where I'm standing. And look, we can do this. We already have more requests. We're in a conversation right now with a church right down the road that we planted back in the 1950s. So we can do this, and I think we're going to be good at it because we're a very caring church, a very nurturing church. And that's just part of our vision of building families. I think building a strong family structure where we're able to almost have a little bit more interconnectivity. You know, we all work for the same guy. And so if we can be better together, then let's be better together. I believe that's where God's calling us, and I think that's the wave of healthy church multiplication in the future. I heard recently that, I think this was in Texas when I heard this, but it was 95% of all church plants fail. 95% of all church plants or new churches will actually fail within about 5 or 10 years. But 95% of church multi-sites succeed. So if our church were to start another campus or adopt another campus, and now we're multi-site like First Baptist Simpsonville, and now Upstate Church is doing that. What we see is the longevity of the ministry and the strength of being together helps push through some of the hard times that we're going to see. The other thing, just to finish up with, is a global vision for missions. I believe that we will plant 5 churches in Nepal over the next 10 years. We currently have an evangelist and a missionary that we support. His name is Umesh. Many of you have seen him. He meets with our team every Sunday night with a group of leaders that are in training through Zoom. And just this past week, he sent me a message and said that he had preached the gospel to, I think, around 300 people, and 123 people came to faith in Christ. And they were planting those people and feeding them to other churches in that area where they were sharing the gospel. But Umesh is a part of our church family. We support him financially, and we don't do much. But to think about just the almost leftover money that we set aside for him, that we don't even miss it, but we send it to him to support him, and to think that little bit of spare change would result in 123 people in Nepal coming to faith in Christ is just a engaging and powerful and encouraging thing. As a pastor, that just makes me joyful. So we need to continue in that direction and not just send funding, but I think Umesh needs to come and be here. He needs to see us and be a part of us, and we need to send some people over there as well. As we think about planting churches internationally, as a church family, that's within our reach, and it's within the vision that God's given our church family through me. So begin to pray about these things, and just remember, this is all about family. That's really where all this comes. The value that we put on family is huge. So we're going to invest in family so that we can, have a vision of leaving a legacy that's even beyond our time here. As we go through the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear a little bit more about the family piece of this, the investing piece of this, and the value, and just know that I'm praying for you, and I look forward to seeing and hearing from you your questions as we talk about the future of this church and what God has for us.